Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew. Welcome back to the stream, or if you're new, welcome. I am an ex executive in the tech industry. I'm in San Francisco currently. It's morning on Saturday, if you're watching this later. I'm a little grumbly in the in my esophagus in the morning, so I might cough a little bit and sound a little bit different today. So I used to be an executive, worked on Instagram and Oculus, and then decided I wanted to devote my life to helping others. Basically, that was kind of my vibe before I got into the tech industry as well, and I hoped that the tech industry would help do that, but it kind of didn't. So I was there for about 7 or 8 years and did more sort of non-profity things in South Africa and more adventure things before that, and am now kind of getting back to that. So I started a company to help others heal through sort of natural means, movement, nutrition, that sort of thing. And then I'm also doing some functional medicine certifications as well. So going to keep that going. And then I'm also building an app with a very dear friend of mine. And I'll be able to tell you guys more about that in the coming months. But so far it's going really well. We have some early users. And so that's very exciting as well. So focusing more on kind of entrepreneurship and helping people heal themselves. And the whole point of this is because I kind of wanted a space to just kind of chat and talk about random things that I'm passionate about. And it's interestingly, a lot of community questions have come in, and we had 4 questions come in about how life started on this planet. So very interesting question. So I had known a little bit about that. It's firmly systems chemistry, and we'll kind of get into what we're talking about and not talking about in just a second. But I'm going to go into that today. And if you have any questions, I haven't created a website specifically for this, so I'm running it through my other company called FitNerds. So fitnerds.club, you can go there, and there's a Ghost Church page there, and you can ask questions or reach out or whatever you want. And I know a few of you have signed up for email updates, and I haven't gotten my newsletter game on yet. So I have a few ideas on how to do that well. I'm trying to decide how much time and energy I want to spend on the stream. I kind of started it as like a fun spare time thing for me. And I'm very happy that a lot of you have been getting some value out of it. So feel free to jump on when I'm streaming or afterward watch it and send a chat. I can see the chat window. So feel free to ask questions during the stream or through the website later afterward if you have something that I said that you think is inaccurate, which I guess I'm wrong all the time. But try to be as accurate as possible and do as much research as possible. But I still make mistakes here and there. So yeah, let me know. Call me out if I say anything inaccurate. And then also, if you have any additional questions or topics or anything you want to say, just let me know. So good to see you all. And I hope you had a great week, and I hope you have a good weekend as well. I'm going to go ahead and jump in and get started. So basically the questions were all kind of centered around like, how did life get started on this particular planet on Earth? And so far it's the only place that we have found sustainably functioning life. There's some upcoming, hopefully, missions to Europa and some other places where we might discover some interesting stuff. The main reason that was catalyzed was because we discovered life under the ice in Antarctica. Basically, there's kind of some freshwater lakes underneath the ice sheet in Antarctica, and we didn't expect to find life there, but there was. And so we're like, well, are there other places in our solar system where there's ice covering a warm ocean? And the answer was yes, there is. So Europa has those exact same conditions, and so a lot of different countries have been sending missions and are planning to send missions there, which is amazing. Outer solar system, so more challenging for sure. Longer travel times, actually landing on the surface is challenging, but very exciting time. I don't know how much of a role the U.S. will play into that because I know our space budget has been getting slashed, but hopefully that will answer some of the questions that we're going to talk about today. And I'm going to kind of try to give a broad generalization of this topic, and then go into some actual harder hitting science as well. Most people don't do this, but I would encourage you to follow up and research anything that sparks your interest. I'll try to do a good job of summarizing everything here, but it's a lot of material, and I'm not a systems chemist myself. So I'm relying on friends who have PhDs in chemistry and other research that I've done, research papers and stuff. I tend to really dislike pop science headlines and sources, so I'll usually read the primary scientific research papers. So there's an abstract, and then there's like sometimes now an editorial section where they'll kind of like make it digestible for people. So I would highly encourage you to go to the sources. A lot of the headlines that you see in Popular Mechanics and those sorts of things are very clickbaity and say dumb stuff like, we may have discovered this, and it's like, did you or didn't you? So I'm going to try not to do that here and actually get into some of the harder parts of the science and still make it digestible for everyone. I also last stream experimented with muting when I'm swallowing my coffee, which I thought was ultra awkward. So I know the sound might not be for everybody, but for some people, they like ASMR and that kind of stuff. So anyway, the feedback I got was just like, drink your coffee and stop worrying about it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to try not to like click my tongue too much. I'm basically trying to get a little bit better at this over time. Okay, so I'm going to jump in. So before we get into this topic itself, I usually start with a couple additions to the How to Think toolkit. So the very first week that I did this was all about how to think and how to approach different topics and how to approach anything new in your life. And over the successive weeks, I've been doing this for maybe 2 months now. I've continually added to that How to Think toolkit for people. And there's a few additional items that I think we need to chat about today because it relates directly to what we're going to talk about. So let me zoom in a little bit further here so you can see that. Hopefully that's clear. Okay. So the first one is a logical fallacy that I see people making a lot, which is called the fallacy of composition. You see this when a lot of people will say something like, well, things in the universe require a cause, so therefore the universe itself requires a cause, and God is that cause, is often how that goes. That's a very old, like hundreds of years old argument called the Kalam cosmological argument. And there's been variations of it in the past as people have tried to kind of tweak it here and there. But basically the idea is that because cause and effect exists in the universe, then we can apply that same principle to the universe itself. But that ends up being a logical fallacy because if you think about like a brick wall, for example, all the bricks might be red. And so if you build a wall out of those bricks, then the wall itself is red. So in that case, the attribute holds. The attributes of the individual components of the system hold to the entire system itself. But if you think about a different attribute, like a brick being small, and then you build a brick wall with the bricks, does that mean that the brick wall itself is small? And the answer is no, not necessarily. So basically the point is that just because all of the components of a system have a certain attribute, does that mean that that attribute applies to the system overall? So I wanted to mention that because a lot of times people get into the details of the origin of life stuff and they think, oh, this is that way and this is that way and that is that way, so therefore the whole universe must be this way. But that's not at all the case. So that's the first logical fallacy to watch out for. People try to make this fallacy all the time. All the members of this school are liberal, so therefore the school itself is liberal. They'll make those kinds of logical leaps, but that's actually a logical fallacy, so just be careful of that. Another logical fallacy I want to get into is called the fallacy of false analogy, and this again happens a ton. So people will say this is this way, and so therefore these other people are that way. I hear this a lot of times in political rhetoric and dialogue today. Not really dialogue, more like mudslinging today online, where people are like, oh, these people are doing this, so therefore they're Nazis. But that is not that there might be components that are similar, so like the suppression of information or that kind of a thing, but unless you are part of the Nazi party, you are calling yourself a Nazi and you're doing all of the things that a Nazi does, then you're not a Nazi. Your movement might be similar to Nazism, but it's not. It's not Nazism. So people try to make those false analogies all of the time. And oftentimes it's like an emotional thing, but in the context of origin of life research and discussion, this happens a lot with people try to talk about irreducible complexity as a very common argument. People will talk about like the eyeball or the bombardier beetle or the hummingbird or like whatever, as you needed all of a wing is another one. You needed all of these components to come together all at once or it wouldn't work, kind of thing. And that's again a logical fallacy in terms of origin of life things, because we have lots of evidence of complex systems slowly building over time. So, like a snowflake, for example, is complex, but it arose by completely natural processes. The irreducible complexity argument is basically something like a watch requires a designer. A watch is very complex and needed to be designed. The universe is very complex, so therefore the universe needs a designer as well. But again, that's a false analogy. Just because a watch is complex and that complexity needed a designer does not mean that the complexity of the universe needed a designer, if that makes sense. So Snowflake is a good example there. Doesn't need a designer, is complex. Galaxies are another one. We see them forming in various stages of development as we look out and see this one's kind of a baby galaxy, and this one's like almost going to die, and these two are crashing together, and we can kind of see that life cycle of how a galaxy works. And if you removed a part of a galaxy, it would significantly alter or destroy the galaxy. So it's kind of like irreducibly complex, but did not require a designer, obviously. And then ecosystems, let me scroll over. Ecosystems are another great example. We see, like, in a fresh area of the planet, like after a volcanic activity or a volcanic island forms or something like that, we can see an ecosystem build up over time. But ecosystems are also irreducibly complex in that if you remove a part of the ecosystem collapses. But we see them slowly build and become more complex over time. So it's very clear just from general observation that complex things do not necessarily require a designer. So just saying this complex thing required a designer, therefore all complex things required a designer, doesn't really make any sense. And that's a logical fallacy of false analogy. And then I really quick want to talk about the eye thing because I just hear it so much. So this isn't abiogenesis or the origin of life, but people often ask this question, and it came in when we were about to talk about this before I started the stream. It was one of the 4 questions. So I wanted to quickly chat about it. We can literally observe these eyes over time, both in living animals today and then also in the fossil record as well. And people try to make the case that, because we have complex eyes now, all the parts would have had to have formed immediately together, and that's just blatantly false. So the way eyes started was just some cells. They're just cells on the surface of an organism that are sensitive to light. So they're photosensitive cells. You could call them pigment, like whatever. And then over time, a slight depression started to form. And again, we can see this in animals today and then also in the fossil record. These are usually called cup eyes. So basically just having photosensitive cells is useful because if there's something above you or it's nighttime instead of daytime or any of that stuff, you can tell what's happening a little bit. Once you start to get a slight depression in there, you can start to tell direction and velocity because you can tell that because of the angle of the cup, the photons will hit like this angle. I don't know if you can see that. And then as the cup goes, the angle changes. So you can basically kind of start to tell movement, which is helpful. So then you can tell if something is like swimming above you, what direction it's swimming, that kind of thing. So that's helpful. And all that is just a slight depression from the photosensitive cells, just a slight depression. From there, if you close that cup a little bit more and more and more, you start to get more focus. This is how a camera obscura works. You can look up YouTube videos of how this works, but if you have a small pinhole, or the smaller the hole, the more in focus everything is. You don't need a lens to do that. It's how early movie cameras and movie projectors worked, was this pinhole idea. And then what happened was there started to be this kind of like film on the top, sort of mineral film, and that helped sort of protect the photosensitive cells as well. So that was basically kind of like an early lens, this one. And then the lens became more developed and pronounced over time, and then eventually you have what we have today, which is a more complex eye. But again, we see the different stages of eyes in various organisms living today, and I'll go through some examples in just a second. But the point here is that at every single successive step of this, the eye is useful. It just becomes more useful over time, and eyes have evolved many times in the history of our very ancient planet, in various ways. That's why you have so many different types of eyes: insect eyes, mammal eyes, like all these different types of eyes, all over the place. And you can see the eyes moving too. Like there's a fish where the eyes started on the sides of the fish, which is how they are for most of them. And then the fish started to kind of like lay on the bottom of the ocean. And so one of the eyes migrated from the side up to the top. So the eyes are like close together on the top of the head. But we can, through the fossil record, you can see that eye shift position. So again, like every step of the way is useful. And so anyone who says like, oh, all of the pieces would have had to come together at the exact same time, or it's not or it wouldn't work, is just blatantly false. So that's an example. Here's an example of just the photosensitive cells on like a tube worm, I think this is. So it's just a patch of cells that can tell if there's photons or not. It's just light sensitive cells. And then they turn into the cup eyes. So a sea star or a starfish has cup eyes at the end of you can see the little cup there, at the end of their tendrils. I don't know what those are called. And so again, like we can study this stuff. That helps it know if there's something above it, the direction of things, that kind of thing. But it's pretty rudimentary, but still useful. And you can look up these other types of eyes and where they appear, and then where different complex eyes appear. Spiders and insects have crazy eyes. So anyway, so that's the second logical fallacy. So basically, in the How to Think toolkit, we've got the fallacy of composition, and we've got the fallacy of false analogy. So just as we're going through this, have those kind of in the back of your brain as we do this. In terms of what you need for life to develop, you need materials, you need the right kind of building blocks, the right kind of ingredients, you need an environment. So like, even if you had all the ingredients for a cake or something, if they were just scattered all over the floor, it wouldn't really work. You have to like put them together in the right way. So that's the environment. Monomers are essentially molecules that form, and here's an example of what those are. They're basically like simple molecules. So like different atoms attach and have different bonds and things. And so they're kind of like basically simple molecules. That's what monomers are. And then polymerization means that you take those monomers and you string them together. So here's an example of what that is. Like here's the monomers, and then here's what a polymer is. You basically kind of organize these together. And then from there, you need it to start essentially self-replicating. This is the jump start of life kind of a thing, where life starts to essentially grow and do stuff. And then you have the first protocell, which is a very simple early cell. And the research has been really exciting the last like 20 years or so. It was really exciting at first, maybe like 100 years ago or so. And then it kind of stagnated. And like the last like 20 years-ish, it's made insanely good progress again. So I think like in the 90s, Not a lot of people are going into this field. This is systems chemistry. And then everything started to kind of move again, and so now everybody, a whole bunch of people, thousands of people, are getting into it again. But we have like quite a bit of evidence for each of these things. Like I'll go through each of these individually, but the materials part we're very confident on. The environment part we're very confident on. Monomers pretty good. Polymerization, like I would say over halfway. Self replication over halfway, but we still have some work to do in both of those. I'd say both of those are like the most challenging steps. And then the protocell is also like I'd say 4 out of 5, like pretty good. Maybe a few less lingering questions on that one, but overall very strong evidence for that. Versus the like life designed evidence. First, you would need some sort of like alien or creature or space wizard or something. You would need to prove that that kind of existed or have evidence for that existing, and then you would need to know that that alien or creature or whatever it is has the ability to make life from scratch. And that, as far as I know, that hasn't been demonstrated at all. And then you would need to prove that or demonstrate that this alien or creature or whatever used their life making powers to make this universe and make this planet and make life on this planet. And so far, I haven't seen any, and I've looked pretty hard, evidence for any of those three things, versus this one has a decent amount of evidence for each of them. Also, the fact that there was like thousands of things throughout human history that we would attribute to some sort of third party, invisible, magical third party. And every single one of those things, except for just a few left, has turned out to be just a natural process. So it would just based on that trend alone, it seems unlikely that we'll get to a point where like, oh, we don't know this step. And so therefore it must have been some sort of magic space wizard that did it. That seems like an unlikely thing. It might happen. And if it does happen, great. And then we need to track down where that thing is and what it did and how it worked and all that stuff. But based on the fact that pretty much everything like lightning and all kinds of stuff, volcanoes, ended up being just a very natural process, and you don't need like some sort of magical third party to do anything with it. I would imagine that there were, out of thousands of things like that, if there's like maybe, I don't know, 10 or 20 left, it would be challenging for me to think that it would be likely that some of those remaining 10 or 20 things would be need magic in order to work. So that's basically that part. I also wanted to quickly talk about what we're not talking about, because I think a lot of these topics kind of get conflated. So we're not talking about the Big Bang at all. That doesn't really have to do with what we're talking with abiogenesis or what we're talking about today. Also, the Big Bang model is like the worst label ever. It was like a pop science label for what's called the lambda CDM model, which is essentially that the universe isn't static. It's dynamic. It's moving. So in science, that's what it's called. And I'll probably refer to it as that from here on out. And I'll try to mention this every time I do, because I think people are just used to the Big Bang. But the problem with Big Bang is it sounds like there was like an explosion and then a bunch of stuff came out of it. But that's not really what it means. It basically just means that the universe is moving. And the evidence that we have right now is that the universe is expanding. Another thing is this is firmly astrophysics, specifically a branch called cosmology. And abiogenesis is firmly chemistry, specifically systems chemistry. So we're not talking about astrophysics today, and we're not talking about cosmology. We can in the future. We're also not talking about evolution, which is biology. I know I mentioned some sort of biology stuff earlier, but for the rest of this presentation, we're going to be talking about chemistry and systems chemistry, because that's how life got started. It's abiogenesis is the technical term. Evolution, once abiogenesis happens and you have life kind of doing its thing and starting to proliferate, then evolution takes over. And evolution, all that means basically is the change in allele frequency between generations or through generations over time. So as generations change, there's a change in allele frequency, and allele frequency sort of drives how organisms work, what they do, what their body plan is, their morphology, their behavior, that kind of stuff. So So we're not going to get into that. We can in the future, but that's firmly biology. And there isn't really a evolutionists. That's not really a thing. There are evolutionary biologists, and they study. They do a lot of research and work on how evolution works and the biology of evolution. But we're not really talking about that today. Again, can in the future just send in some questions if you have questions about it. Happy to do that. I also wanted to talk a little bit before we jump into those steps of why people really like the Space Wizard story, like why they kind of, I know a lot of people who kind of prefer that, this idea that there's some kind of creature or alien or some kind of third party out there that's got magical powers that like made all this. And I think it's kind of hard for some people to like let go of that. And I think it can be because people kind of want to feel special and they want to feel like they're part of this grand narrative. You kind of get to be part of this like superhero movie basically, where there's this creature thing that's really awesome. It has superpowers and it like made an army and then the army rebelled and then like you're fighting it and you're kind of constantly caught up in this like cosmic war of good and evil and like it made this planet, it made us, and we have a purpose and like all these things. And I think that's really appealing to a lot of people. It's the same reason why Marvel movies are popular and superhero movies are popular. Like people like these, or movies are popular in general because people like these kind of like dramatic stories, and we're a culture and a species that has sort of grown like for 300,000 years we've had story and we kind of communicate through story and we resonate deeply with story and stuff. And so this Space Wizard story is a story, and people like being able to find themselves in the story, and it brings them like comfort and like a sense of purpose and identity and all that stuff, which I totally get it. My issue with it though is that it's not real. It's kind of like expecting love or relationships to be like a Disney movie or a rom-com. Like those stories are fun to like put on and enjoy and stuff, but that doesn't mean that life is like a Disney movie or life is like a rom-com. Life is very different. There's a lot of things about life that suck. There's things you have to be resilient against. Shit goes down. You have to learn to navigate through it and push through it. Relationships are challenging. You have to learn how to communicate. You have to learn how to repair after a rupture. Like there's a lot of components to it that aren't captured in those stories. So basically those stories are essentially just fake. And they're fun, but they don't really accurately describe life. And similarly, this kind of story of this grand narrative of this space wizard who made all this stuff, and you're special, and like we're unique, and all that other stuff, and we're in this part of this grand narrative. Like, sounds cool, sounds nice, probably makes you feel good. But at the end of the day, there's essentially no evidence for that whatsoever. And life is got a lot of things that suck, and there's death, and people get diseases and all kinds of stuff. A lot of religions will try to explain that away for various reasons, but it's not really a fully formed concept because you have to basically kind of like create these fan fiction like narratives, like that these people got cancer because of there was a fallen world, and like because a woman ate a fruit once, and like stuff like that. But the naturalistic explanation where life sort of arose and has been very chaotic, very, very is very, very equipped to tackle natural disasters and things going wrong, because of course they would, because the universe is chaotic and Earth is chaotic. So it's a much more like realistic take on that. You don't have to hand wave and explain a bunch of stuff away and it not really make sense. And so anyway, I just wanted to mention that too. Because I get, as we go through this, that some people might be challenged by this or resistant to it psychologically, because it's kind of like it's like you're kind of like warmly nestled in a cozy blanket on the couch, and then someone like rips your blanket off, and that sucks. So I get that. So it really depends on if you want to face reality or not. If you want to keep believing that life is like a rom-com or life is like a Disney movie, like stop watching. The rest of this is going to be us kind of going through the evidence of how life formed on this planet, and there isn't a space wizard involved. So if you want that kind of comfort and just would prefer to believe with no evidence that there's some sort of alien out there that made you specifically, it's special, and there's this grand narrative, like go for it. No judgment. That's just not at all what the evidence says, and today we're going to go through the evidence. So the first piece that I want to talk about is materials. So this has been very exciting as we've increased our space footprint, and specifically a lot of other countries in South Korea and some places who you wouldn't expect have been doing a lot of fantastic work here. So as we explore more of space and land on comets and asteroids and those sorts of things, and explore more of the outer solar system, landing on distant moons of Jupiter and Saturn and things, which we've never done before, and is incredibly challenging to do all that stuff. Like landing on a comet or an asteroid is fucking bananas. What's really interesting about it, though, is that we find the complex building blocks for life everywhere. Space is just dripping with them all over the place. So we find amino acids in bucket loads. I think we found like 90 to 200, somewhere in that range of amino acids. We only need 20 for life. So it's bananas that we find so many different ones. It's clear that like the ingredients for life are very diverse, very plentiful out there. Nucleobases, we find a ton of. Sugars, we don't find as many, but we do find them. That was like a big hole for a while, and then finally we started to find sugars as well. So that's a big deal. Lipids, incredibly plentiful as well, which are very, very key to forming the first cells. Lipids are basically the thing that creates the cell membrane. So you kind of need all four of those major molecules to create life, and they're just they're not only on places with like liquid something like methane or water or whatever it is. They're also just on these dead asteroids and stuff, just like hanging out, which is bananas. It's bananas that they formed, and it's also bananas that they didn't get broken down by UV, like the particles that come from the star, any star. It's basically the stars emitting tons of radiation and particles, and that can destroy stuff easily. So the fact that these were resilient enough against that was crazy, and sheltered in some way, or just tough enough, or whatever it is crazy. And then not only in space, but here on our planet, they're everywhere. So this idea that like complex molecules and the building blocks of life like couldn't form is just blatantly false. If anyone ever says that, they're just blatantly wrong. That's why I give it 5 stars. Like, this is everywhere. I did hear one guy one time who was like, well, if there's like 90 different amino acids, how come there's only 20 here? And it's the same reason, like, you might have a garage full of tools, but you only use these 3 or 4 tools for this particular job or whatever. Life just didn't need all those different ones. It latched onto a few different ones that worked for it. So that's basically how that worked. Having more options, I think, is exciting because it means that there's other configurations of how life could have formed in other places too. So I think having a surplus of different types of amino acids is actually much stronger evidence that life can form, rather than this guy was like trying to make it seem like it was a bad thing. But that doesn't make any sense. And the second thing you need is environment. So did we have energy, what's called cycling? Was it stable enough? As I mentioned, you need some level of protection from UV. And the answer to all of those questions is yes. We had all of that stuff. That's why I gave this 5 stars as well. So plenty of energy around, plenty of cycling around. We have an ocean that freezes and thaws and moves around with currents, and there's a rain cycle that creates erosion. Like, basically, the planet it's got a lot of motion and energy to it, so things are like moving around, and that's the environment that you would need and want. A very stagnant, sort of dead world with no movement and energy transfer would be very challenging for life to form there. While you need some movement, you can't make it too chaotic either. So there can't be tons of meteorites crashing into the planet. There can't be crazy volcanic activity where everything is lava and stuff like that. So there needs to be this kind of balance between its cycling and energy is being transferred, but it's stable enough that it's not like wrecking everything constantly. So you need both of those things, and then you also need some level of protection from the star. As I mentioned, the star is just blasting things out, and due to Earth's accidentally having a pretty awesome magnetic field, we get shielded from a lot of that stuff. And then there's the atmosphere on top of that, and then you can also be like under the water. There can be mineral films protecting things. There can be rock pores where you're kind of like under a little indention in the rock or something and protected from the like little areas of shade and stuff all over the place. So that's not very challenging to get either. In fact, that's I think one of the main theories of how these things have lasted so long on asteroids is because there's a lot of little kind of indentions that are protected. So monomers is a little bit more challenging. Basically, how do you get these very abundant, complex building blocks to then assemble into more complex structures? And we've made a tremendous amount of progress on this, but there's still some open questions. That's why gave it a 3 out of 5 currently. But again, it was like a 0 out of 5, like 30 or 40 years ago. So we made a tremendous amount of progress in just the last 30 or 40 years on this, from a 0 out of 5 to a 3 out of 5. So I expect that to continue into the future. No idea what will happen in the future. A good example, Veritasium is a YouTube channel that I love to watch, and he just did a video on protein folding algorithms and how for the last like 100 years humans used to do it by hand and then started using computational algorithms and stuff to do it. We were able to sequence about 100,000 different proteins, and then once AI was created, and then that created a leap forward, and we've sequenced now like 9 million or something like that. So like for 100 years it was 100,000, and then in like the span of a year or 6 months or something, they were able to sequence millions of them. So those kinds of leaps happen. So we may experience a leap like this, or it may take another 100 years or something for us to really figure this out. But that being said, the last 30 or 40 years, we've gone from 0 out of 3 to 3 out of 5, or 0 out of 5 to 3 out of 5. So I think that's a pretty substantial jump just from the manual stuff. And we'll continue to get better at this over time. But basically, one other thing I wanted to quickly mention is these materials, we also find them all together on the same rock in the same place. And that plays into this too, because not only do you want these to form into monomers, you also need them to form into a lot of different things all in the same place. It would be like if you had the ingredients for a cake or something, and you had part of the ingredients in your kitchen and part of the ingredients in a friend's kitchen and part of the ingredients downtown in the grocery store. It doesn't really work. You need them all in the same place. So that's one of the things that we've been discovering, is how prolific these things are in the same place. Another thing to mention here that is a big deal in systems chemistry is something called left-handedness or right-handedness. They call this chirality for some reason, but basically you can have a molecule and it can have something off to the left or off to the right. And it, depending on which side, even though it's basically just kind of flipped. So like something has a thing over here and you flip it and it has a thing over here instead. The issue is that those different left or right-handed ones do crazy different stuff. So like you could have a medication that it has the right-handed part, and it essentially solves morning sickness or something like that. And then if you flip it, it like kills you. So the direction that these side chains go off of is incredibly important. And finally, we're getting to the point where we can kind of create, for some reason on our planet, all of life has what's called, I think, left-handed chirality. So chirality just means that left or right-handedness. Like something is homochiral if it's just got a side chain on one side. And so that's called the chiral configuration in technical systems chemistry. And everything we find on Earth, I think, is left-handed. But things we find sort of throughout space and whatever has a slight left-handed bias, but is a mixture of both right and left-handed. So there's some sort of process that we don't really know about yet that filters that down to just left-handed versions, and that's basically what life is built upon here on this planet. It is interesting to me that the monomers they find in space and in different places and the things that we created in the lab have a slight left-handed bias, which is exactly what we need for the planet. So there's some mechanism at play that we don't fully understand. These are also needed before you can get to RNA and those sorts of things. So there's some open questions here, but it's not like we don't know anything. There's been a lot of progress here, and we've also been able to get the correct chirality or stereochemistry going, which is very exciting and cool. And again, this is all what's called prebiotic, which means it's in the same conditions that would have been present on the planet, sort of naturally occurs, doesn't need like any intervention from us. So right now, to get just left-handed requires some intervention from us. So we don't know what the mechanism is to do that part of it, but the rest of it, for forming these different monomers, is able to happen naturally. So that means we've made a lot of progress. Again, gone from 0 out of 5 to 3 out of 5. So still some open questions here, but tremendous amount of progress in the last like 30 to 40 years. So once you have the monomer, I'm going to go back to this real quick. Once you have the monomer, then you need to string them together like this. So they need to go from just kind of these complex molecules into like a sequence of them. That's called polymerization. Why it's called polymerization, who fucking knows? Does this happen? Can we get this to happen naturally? The answer is yes. So, as I mentioned earlier, wet-dry cycling. So when things become wet and then they evaporate and become dry, and then also when they freeze and then they thaw, that kind of movement naturally creates these structures, which is amazing. So not only do they create these structures, they can also create pretty long ones. So structures that are up to 100 nucleotides long sort of naturally form, and they naturally fold, which is crazy, because we for a long time thought that you needed proteins in order to make things fold, but you don't. They can fold on their own, which was a huge breakthrough. And these lengths grow each cycle, which is interesting. So this is all just very naturally occurring. These monomers sort of self-assemble into these strings, so they self-polymerize basically. And wet-dry cycling does this, and freeze-thaw cycling does this. There's also what's called mineral catalysis. So sometimes these molecules, these monomers, get trapped in a mineral area, and this mineral area basically acts like a 3D printer. So it helps the monomers polymerize, assemble in a sequence, and it also protects them as well. So that if you think of mineral catalysis as basically like a little 3D printer, it's just like a mineral medium, and then they come in and then they get oriented correctly, and then it protects them as well. So that's another way that monomers can polymerize and form a sequence. You also need energy into the system, and for a while we didn't know where that was coming from exactly, but it turns out there's a lot of sort of natural batteries that are happening, which are dumping energy into a system. So like these vents are one of them. This is a current one, and this is an old one. So we see lots of evidence of these all over the place. Basically, the Earth's core is warm, and that heat needs to escape, and so it exits in various places on the planet. Volcanoes are these vents, and that adds energy to the system. So that works basically like a natural battery. So that discovery was very exciting because it meant that there was a source of energy to create some of the chemistry needed. And then, interestingly, these chains start self-replicating as well. That was a surprise. This step is we're still doing some research on this because this self-replication does require us to add in a little extra in order to make this happen. And we're not exactly sure how that would happen naturally yet. But again, if there's like 20 steps to the process, we don't know like 3 of them or something. So it's not like the worst case scenario. We're still working on this, and there's some promising and plausible pathways to this. But the fact that they kind of automatically start self-replicating is very interesting. And we don't need to do much in order to get that to happen, which means we can probably, again, we have some naturally plausible pathways. We just need to demonstrate that it can occur in a prebiotic fashion, but that's what they're working on currently. So I would expect that in the next, 10 to 100 years probably, is figuring that step out. Membranes, interestingly, are very easy to form. This was a surprise to everyone, I think. But basically, membranes kind of naturally form it and encapsulate the RNA inside, um, whatever polymer is inside, which I think was very surprising. It's just kind of a natural thing that happens with lipids. They just do this. Um, So that's very interesting too. So basically, for polymerization, a little more complicated, a little more sciencey. I made a table, which I love. Hopefully, that all makes sense. I would recommend you dig deeper into this. But basically, there's a lot we know about this, and a lot that makes sense, and we see a lot of these processes happening. But there's a few parts of this, specifically the self-replication part, where we need to introduce just a little bit in the lab in order to make it work, or make them automatically self-assemble or self-replicate, I mean. So that's kind of the last remaining piece on polymerization. But because that's a big step, I didn't want to rank this 4 out of 5, so I put it as 3 out of 5. A little bit more on the self-replication if you want to chase this down. This is the technical term for this, the triplet polymerase ribosome. And again, I mentioned it's like 100 to 200 nucleotides long. But what we don't know is how to do it without adding these activated triplet substrates, and how to do it prebiotically. So if you want to research that, this is the technical language for that. And again, the last piece here is this protocell thing. There's like just cell wall self-assembly, cell division, cell growth, all that kind of stuff is we kind of know that part of it. So that's like the ending, kind of once you want to form like a protocell, that stuff is pretty good to go. It's really there's a few pieces of the polymerization, and there's a few pieces of the monomer that we still need to figure out. So to kind of put a bow on this at the end, I wanted to mention that it's not, to me, that challenging to see this like non-life to life chemical reaction thing happening, because it happens in our bodies all the time. We will eat salt or drink water or like a whole bunch of different stuff, and that stuff is non-living, and our body uses chemical reactions to turn it into living material. So this kind of like conversion from non-life to life happens in your body thousands of times a day. So for it to happen over time on this planet doesn't seem like a stretch to me at all. Here's a map of what your metabolism is. This is the thousands of chemical reactions a day thing that I was mentioning. This is like when you eat food or drink water or like do anything, get sunlight on your skin, like all this stuff. These are the chemical reactions happening in your body. Your body is basically just chemistry, doing a bunch of stuff. And it's very complicated, and it all feeds back on itself. And that's why like nutrition science keeps changing things, because we learn more about how this thing, it affects this thing, but then that affects this thing over here, and like it's basically really complicated, and we try to understand it all. But it seems very clear that like life arose from chemistry, because chemistry drives life basically. Another thing to mention here is that sometimes people like look at life. They're like, I think that there's a magic space wizard because I look in there's the trees, and the trees seem really complicated, and like it's amazing because they're clearly designed and all this stuff. That's usually called the look at the trees argument. Or like you go to a museum and you're like, oh, look at all these animals, like someone must have made that, because it's complex. But again, to go back to the logical fallacies, that's a false analogy. Just because certain things are complex and require a designer doesn't mean that all complex things require a designer. And this is obviously very complex. When I see this, I don't think, oh, this required some super intelligent person to put together. I'm like, this is a mess. So I was head of design at Meta, and worked on Instagram and Oculus and some things, and head of design at Cameo. And this does not look well designed to me at all. It would be basically equivalent of doing something like this. Like, instead of making the engine all nice, and inside the car and like everything makes sense. I used to drive really crappy cars because I was poor for a long time, and I grew up super poor, and then became successful, and now drive a BMW. And every time I pop the hood, I'm like, holy crap, like this is so nice inside. It's so much different than every other car I've owned, which I've been able to like repair myself, and and I loved that stuff. But now it's like it just looks extremely slick and all that stuff, and it looks so well designed. But like this looks like a mess, right? Like it would like this is a big mess, and something that is like intentionally designed by a hyper smart alien or space wizard or something wouldn't look like this. And this is like clearly just a big mess that things have been glued on and shifted around over time and just like yeah. Another thing that people try to talk about with this is like the concept of fine tuning, but that also doesn't make sense at all, really, because there's lots of different ways that this could have come to be, and there's lots of different amino acids and stuff. And they'll try to use like some discovery in physics where it's like, oh, if this one physics constant was off by a little bit, then like the universe would have never formed and that kind of stuff. But that's often because they don't really know how it works. And the fine tuning argument is kind of like saying a puddle formed and therefore this hole was made specifically for me. Like the puddle saying, this hole is specifically for me. Like that doesn't really make any sense. There was just a hole that formed. There was rainwater that came in, and that rainwater pooled in this area because there was a hole that formed. The hole wasn't made specifically for you. It's just there and you filled it, basically. So that's fine tuning doesn't really make sense. Like these things occurred, life utilized them and came to be, and that's just how it is. There isn't like nobody came along and dug this hole in order for this puddle to be here. So to recap then, materials very strong, environment very strong, monomers I would say 4 out of 5, like pretty good. A few open questions, polymerization and self-replication 3 out of 5. Still some decent open questions, but very confident in the next like 10 to 100 years that we'll make pretty significant progress given the progress that we made over the last 30 or 40 years. Protocell pretty good too. A few minor lingering questions there, but the lipid layer forming membrane is encouraging. And then I wanted to just make this point one more time. Even if you like we got to the point where we're like, oh, monomers can't form, or polymerization can't work, or self-replication can't work, like none of this works, or even if we had zero evidence of this and it was just gone, we still are left with zero evidence for this. I talked about this a few sessions ago, but x equals 0 does not mean that y equals 1. That's another how to think toolkit thing. So like even if like it turned out that all of this was stuff that I just talked about was bogus and you debunked it all and there was nothing there, you're still left with no evidence whatsoever for this one too. So what you would need to do is figure out some evidence, find some evidence that some sort of alien creature, space wizard thing exists, that thing has the power to make life, and then that thing used their life-making power to make this universe and make life on this planet. Debunking or challenging any of the stuff I talked about does not help you in any way with this. So I just wanted to mention that too. If people are serious about this kind of idea that there's some sort of big alien out there that makes life, you need to do the work of finding it and then figuring out how it works and what mechanisms it uses to make life, and then demonstrate all that stuff. Attacking this research that's done by thousands of amazing, smart scientists isn't going to get you anywhere. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is kind of a hopeful note, is just because life occurred naturally on this planet, it's pretty clear based on the evidence that we have, that doesn't mean that it sucks. Like some people are like, oh, well then what's my purpose? What's the point of anything? And they get into this like nihilistic vibe, which I'm no judgment. I have a lot of friends who are nihilists. But I just don't see it that way. I feel like chemistry to consciousness isn't sad. From a trillion reactions, one fragile thread learned to copy itself and then learn to care. Like there's people out there who care about you. I care very much about my wife and my family and my friends, and have worked really hard to help other people. And that's the whole point of this, is helping people heal themselves. Some guy asked how I am. 1 second. And then in the chat. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. Hope you're doing well, Patricia Parker 90. I've spent a lot of my life like basically helping other people and caring about them. Like I did a lot of nonprofit stuff earlier on before I got into the tech industry, and got into the tech industry to help people. And now I'm helping them more directly. And the whole point of this Ghost Church thing is to help people heal themselves and then also help heal other people as well. So I think just focusing on yourself can be harmful. Just focusing on others can be harmful because you ignore yourself and you end up not being healthy. So the whole point of Ghost Church is to do both. We help each other heal, and we help ourselves heal as well. So we're caring about both of those things. And it's crazy to me that a bunch of chemistry can produce life, and then life can eventually produce consciousness, and then consciousness can produce this caring. Like that feels like an epic story and an awesome story to me. It's basically from stars to songs. And then I had a last little quote here, which is something my brother reminded me of because my father is probably going to pass on soon. And so we have been talking about a lot of end of life and death stuff. So basically this is a quote from a long time ago. Buddhists use it now, but it actually goes back and is a Vedic thing from about 3K years ago in India somewhere. But again, lots of different cultures use the same sentiment. But basically, like if you think of each life as a wave, it's unique, beautiful, made of the ocean itself. And then when the wave settles, the water is still there, now free to rise again in endless forms. So essentially, like when my father passes on, the wave that is him will go back to the ocean, and that's it. And so you're made of the universe, and to me that feels very. To me it feels more comforting than there's some sort of being out there that like made me and expects something from me and like demands things of me, and like, am I pleasing it? Am I not? Like being a people pleaser for it. And it's like threatening me with things and wanting me to behave a certain way if I don't do what it says. And like all of that stuff seems way shittier to me than this kind of idea that like you're made of the universe, and like the things that made the universe also made you, and like you're kind of a thing that happened that's incredible. From all of this stuff, it's sort of like a person who can kind of pull from their surroundings and make of it something more, like people who are very creative or entrepreneurial or those sorts of things are very inspiring to me. And that's basically what life did. It pulled from its surroundings and made of it something more. And I love that idea. And then I wanted to, well, hopefully this won't be too loud, but I wanted to end with a video, mainly because a lot of times I've heard people, I grew up in the Midwest, and so a lot of times people will be like, I don't believe any of that stuff. Like they can't even like predict the weather or whatever. So like, how do they know all this stuff? Like they can't even, I don't know. My phone doesn't work. So like, how do they know what life was like? Like we don't even know if it's going to rain tomorrow. Like what, like that kind of thing. And so I wanted to mention this video real quick, who is a comedian whom I really love, named Ismo. And he talks about this kind of exact thing. And hopefully this won't be too loud. I turned down what I think is the audio stream from my computer itself. And then I'll turn it down on the actual video itself, but hopefully this won't blow you out of the water. But hopefully you can hear it.
If somebody here is complaining about like technology or equipment or something, they often say, I think, something like this. They often say like, I don't get it. I don't get it. They can put a man on the moon and still they can't make a quiet leaf blower. Like, people say things like that. And always when I hear somebody say things like that, I always want to say to them, I want to say that the people who are putting men on the moon and the people who are making leaf blowers, not the same people.
Okay, so hopefully that wasn't too loud, but yeah, so that's basically the point. Like, just because we don't know some weathermen are morons, and meteorology is challenging doesn't mean we can't know anything about systems chemistry. Those two are just completely unrelated. So, so anyway, to recap really quick, hopefully this works. Okay. To recap really quick, basically there was some how to think stuff, logical fallacy of composition and false analogy, went through that, went through the different elements of life, not talking about the Lambda CDM model, not talking about evolution, why the Space Wizard story is comforting, and how to face reality. Facing reality has been a big theme over the weeks and will continue to be a big theme. I think it's one of my core values as a human. I'm really big into people actually facing the reality of themselves, facing the reality of life, the world around them, politics, their country, pretty much everything. Like, face the actual reality. Don't hallucinate some projection or comforting thing that you want to believe. Actually learn and know as many things that are true instead of just believing what you prefer to believe. So we talked about that. We went through the materials of life, the environment for life, monomers, polymerization, self-replication, and then protocells. And then I had a few last little bits and pieces here at the end. So hopefully that answers the questions that I got. If you have any additional questions, please do reach out. Again, it's fitnerds.club. Here, let me see if I can pull this up. I should have done this earlier. Fitnerds.club. So here's the website that I made. And then there's a Ghost Church tab at the very top here. And if you scroll down, there's a question box. So you can ask a question here. If you want to sign up for updates, you can do that. I haven't sent any out yet. So that's basically that. Hopefully that makes sense. If you need or want anything else, please do reach out. Again, you can get in contact with me through fitners.club. And then I will see you all next week. Thanks for watching. Hopefully, Patricia, Parker, you're doing well. Please do let me know if you have any more questions. All right, see you all. Bye. Have a good weekend.